dads can be challenged economically, and that can lead to pressure, internal pressure that's kept inside. There are many men that are screaming and nothing's coming out. Have you ever snapped at your kids and immediately thought, that's not the dad I want to be, and wondered how you got there? Well, today on Dad Central, we're going to talk about why good dads lose their cool, the real story behind dad anger. And it's an episode that we're not shaming dads, but it's about understanding about what's really going on beneath the anger. So we're really happy to have you here. As always, you're watching Dad Central, a parenting podcast to reduce stress and build confidence in fatherhood. As always, our show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. When Dove Men Plus Care believe care is the best of a man, because when men care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. Drew, good to have you as always. And what are your thoughts on this subject?
Well, thanks, Ed. These conversations are good, but they're also sometimes challenging. This topic in particular, I feel like I've lived it for sure. And I know that there are many dads who might struggle with this idea of staying calm. In fact, as I do workshops or as I travel around to different places and connect with dads, I would say it might be one of the top challenges that most dads express. So, if you're a dad and you're listening, I guess the first thing is we get it. I get it personally. And the goal here is to, as Ed said, is to really come alongside you and support you in the goals that you have, which are being a little more calm or being able to manage the realities of what's going on so that they don't spill out to those around you, which from my perspective is the goal of every dad that I've talked to who struggles with this. So it's an important conversation.
Yeah. And you are reading my alleged mind, because this is one of the top things, not only you, not only myself, but when we have conversations with dad, whether it's together or individually, it's always one of their top challenges. So we hear you, we feel you. So before we get into it, let's hear it out that most dads who lose their cool care deeply about their families, and that anger is often mislabeled as a problem when it's actually a signal. And then society tells dads to be, quote, calm. I don't think people love to always be calm, but it really teaches them how. So let's start with the first part here.
Doesn't teach them how. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the myth of the angry dad. So go for it.
Well, there are, I would say, a lot of unique challenges. And so why are we saying it's the myth of the angry dad is, as I think you mentioned, Ed, that dads really do care. The research we have is clear that dads want to be positively involved in the lives of their children. They want to be connected and they want to see healthy relationships. And really what matters most to dads is helping their children be successful. And so they care, right? And so the reality is that there is truth to the fact that anger usually leads to poor actions, explosive, destructive actions. Doesn't mean it has to. It can. And often those angry outbursts are what get an overemphasis in the media or publicly or even in our own minds, when really that's a small percentage of what's actually going on, right? In terms of, so anger is seen as this huge problem when really what it is it's a signal that there's an unmet need, there's unregulated stress, or there's other complicating factors that are now only being shown as a result of this anger that's coming out. So it's a signal. It's not the main problem. And so you have to identify, well, what is it really pointing to? And so I think those are some things that we'll talk about briefly in this conversation. Obviously, we're not going to go too deep, but we're going to get, I think, as real and as practical as possible.
Yeah. As always, great insight, Drew. I want to go a little bit further about this whole area of telling dads to be calm, but rarely teaching them how.
Yeah. when I was thinking about this conversation, I remember a book that I read years ago by David Powlison called Good and Angry.
Mm,
And I think it's a great resource. In fact, I'll put a link to it in the show notes of today because it really helped reframe this idea of anger being bad. And because anger is just another emotion, and emotions are neither good or bad, they are what they are. And so society tells dads to be calm because they see anger as the problem, like we talked about. And so there is no real equipping of how do I manage this emotion, because that's what it is, to be healthy, constructive, and positive, as well as recognizing that it actually has value. Anger has value because it's a good emotion, because what it means is that something wrong has happened. The problem is that anger often becomes, and we'll talk about this in the next segment, is anger becomes the way to express other emotions. It's like a gateway drug. It's like the real emotion is actually underneath it, but it gets expressed as anger because sometimes that's the only emotion that might be seen as safe. Again, we'll talk more about this as we go through. Those are some
yeah,
thoughts.
yeah, fantastic. As we transition to our next part of our conversation, what's really behind that anger, Drew?
Yeah. I mean, there could be a long list of things. And I think I like to talk about this from personal experiences, as well as some of what I've learned, as well as what research might tell us. And so I would say there's a couple things that I want to talk on, and then Ed, you can probably share some as well. So for me, role modeling, what we see as we're growing up often becomes the way that we manage ourselves. And so many of us grew up with angry dads or angry men or men who the only way that they ever did express emotion was through anger. You didn't see other emotions. So I think those role models play a significant part. And I think there are some maybe famous role models who, they're known for expressing anger. I think of a couple of coaches. I think of Bill Parcells. I think of Bobby Knight. I think of these men who you see them doing these things that it's really expression of anger, and kind of sometimes revere them. That's one thought. Also, like what we've learned from our parents is often, and moms and dads can often express anger in unhealthy, explosive ways, and we learn that as children growing up. Children learn what they live. The other thing is sometimes it's frowned upon if you're a man and you express emotion like compassion or emotion like sadness or grief when you're having tears. Like that's not seen as, we'll say, socially acceptable. So if we feel it's only okay for me to express emotion if I'm viewed as angry and tough and mean, because that seems to be okay. So those are some of my thoughts that I think really do influence what's going on behind this anger. I mean, the reality is that there's also a lot of other things that are happening, and maybe you can talk to some of just the realities of the pressures that dads experience.
Yeah, Drew, again, great insight. I'll just add on to it some just everyday life can be there's stress, emotional overload. We don't want to go down the road of being a provider and all that. That's a whole other conversation. But there is also, in these days of economic times, many of us are challenged economically. And of course, dads can be challenged economically, and that can lead to pressure, internal pressure that's kept inside, and then not having an outlet a good outlet to release that pressure. And as like I said, one of the first gentlemen who mentored me in the world of fatherhood, he said, Ed, there are many men that are screaming and nothing's coming out. And I have never forgot that line. So the lack of emotional outlets or language that's, behind that can be very challenging. So what we want to do before we move on to our next section is look at anger is often the last ditch attempt to release pressure.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the people who are watching or listening to this, I can relate to that. I'm sure Drew can relate to that. It's a very powerful moment. Drew has something he wants to add on that. I love that. Go ahead.
I think this is really important here. And yes, it's often a last ditch effort, many times because we don't actually have the tools to one, recognize what we're actually feeling, two, communicate it in a way that others around us can actually understand and then be able to support us. And that's where I think things fall flat. And that's why we're going to talk about it next.
Yeah, I love how you did that, Drew. Providing the tools. That's what we're here for. We're providing the tools to help you not only with areas of angerhood, but areas of fatherhood. Let's move to our next conversation piece. Why it comes out at home.
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately, home is intended to be that safe place. It's where we often feel we don't have as hopefully as much pressure to perform, to deliver, to meet expectations other than our own. And so we can feel a little bit safer at home to drop our guard, as well as we feel a little bit maybe safer to just fully be ourselves because we don't have that pressure to perform. The other thing is, kids are, I would say, hardwired to trigger those things inside of us that we didn't even realize were there, or we try to pretend and bury and push aside. But those kids absolutely will tap into that. Not necessarily intentionally. It's just I like to say it's the gift of children is to help you with these things that have been locked inside that ultimately you and your family will be better off if they're healed and resolved. So kids trigger those things. And then this is a huge one, I think, for men in particular, but anyone, is that when you feel a loss of control or you feel a real sense of insecurity, it might be hard for dads to maybe admit, but when you feel a loss of control or feel helpless, that fear is often disguised and comes out as anger. And I'll be the first to acknowledge that has absolutely happened for me and sometimes still does. It's just it takes a lot of work to identify it and not have it trigger you, but actually learn how to resolve it.
Yeah, that's so good, Drew. And I know that I appreciate and the listeners and viewers appreciate whenever you can bring some personal insight from your journey of fatherhood, because I know it's helping at least one person out there. So really appreciate that. Before we move on to our next section, just want to say you're not choosing to explode. Your nervous system is overloaded. So no different than, how I put it, the water, the radiator blowing, it's overloaded. So that's what we're putting in,
Yeah.
you're not choosing to explode. It just, you're overloaded. It's going to come out.
It's
So let's move to our
also,
next. Go ahead.
it's also, I'll say pre-programmed if this has been your way of
Yes.
resolving it. So, this is, some of this is maybe neurosciences. The reality is that the more that you behave in a certain way and patterns are laid down in your mind, in your nervous system, the easier and more quickly you'll just kind of do those things, right? They become almost automatic. And so this takes conscious effort and intention to actually make some changes. But it is absolutely crucial, absolutely possible. And something that again, hopefully we give you dads practical ways to do this. So your nervous system is absolutely overloaded, but it's also sometimes on autopilot. You got to snap it out of autopilot.
All right. So let's close it down with what good dads can do differently. What can they do differently, Drew?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is awareness, right? It's identifying what's going on inside of me in reaction or to the stimulus that I'm experiencing. It could be work pressures. It could be internal conflicts. It could be relational conflicts. And then what's happening inside your body. Men often carry stress, we'll say, in their midsection sort of torso area. Or sometimes maybe you carry it in your neck. Either way, what's going on in your body? Where are you feeling tension? Where are you feeling stress? Where are you feeling, these sensations that are kind of, taking you out of a place of more peace or calm? So I think that is number one. And so simple breathing is the most powerful. Like you talked about this routine when the dad would come home from work and he'd just go straight home. Take 5 minutes in the car, do some breathing, calm your thoughts, and then sort of pay attention. What's going on? What was stressful about my day today? Where do I feel off? And then from that awareness, you can begin to change your thoughts. And that's really important. So there's this idea also of replacing suppression. We kind of stuff it down. We got it. Well, it's okay. I can handle it. Just move on to the next thing. But you want to replace this idea of suppression with actual release. The more that you feel a feeling or process an emotion, the less it has control over you. And the less it can be bottled up, like that pop bottle analogy where, you just shake it, and the pressure builds up until eventually it explodes. You don't want that. You want slow releases. So movement, exercise, right? Breathing, we talked about. Learning to actually be able to communicate and share with trusted people is important. Sometimes quiet time, sometimes reflection, sometimes prayer, sometimes faith practices, sometimes tears. In fact, for me, through some of my very deep, challenging times, tears were extremely healing to help process some of the pent up emotion. So, and then naming emotions is, I think, important as opposed to fighting them. It's not weakness to say, I'm feeling really sad today. I may not know why, but it's okay to acknowledge it because it's just an emotion. Feeling is just a feeling. It's not in control of you, right? The problem is we allow them to control when we don't name them. I think there's a fun saying that in order to, you have to name it to tame it. Easy to remember.
Love that.
And Ed, you
Love
can finish off with the last point we want to talk about here because this is so crucial.
model repair, not perfection with your kids. I can't, that is so strong. We want repair, not perfection. I tell people perfection is a moment. And then 1 second later, it's all back to craziness, but we want to model the repair. And I think the modeling repair is even so valuable because you're working with your kids. The modeling, you're working with yourself and your kids, and you're working together to win together. I just thought about when we were chatting about now, the repair it's a great journey. Just like fatherhood and parenting, repairing is a journey. It's a journey. Drew, anything you want to add with that? That just like hit me like in the last 30 seconds about that repair that is part of the fatherhood journey.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you don't beat yourself up if you make a mistake. The reality is we all make mistakes. We're far from perfect. And we want to model healthy repair for ourselves as well as healthy repair for our children. So if we can forgive ourselves, if we can let go and say, you know what, that's not the type of dad I am, and it was a momentary mistake, and you just go and you humble yourself and say, I'm really sorry. Can we have a do-over? Or can I have a do-over? I want to try again because I know that hurt you, or I know that wasn't the way you want to be spoken to. So I'm going to change it. And acknowledging that, hey, I'm becoming a calmer dad, which we've talked about before, as opposed to beating yourself up with such negative self-talk, which only keeps you stuck and only prevents you from being able to make the necessary changes to become the calmer dad you want to be. So, yeah, I think it's really important.
Yeah. So what we covered today, the myth of the angry dad. Also, what's really behind dad anger? Why it comes out at home, and then finally, what can dads do differently? So some takeaways: good dads experience anger because they care deeply. And anger is a signal, not a character flaw. Stress, pressure, and emotional isolation fuel outbursts, sorry. And then awareness and repair matter more than perfection. And then change starts with understanding, not shame. Drew, what's our resource for our family today?
A resource is our dad mentor, father leader community. At the end of the day, fatherhood was not meant to be a solo journey. And too often, trying to grow and lead your family in the way you want to is men are doing it alone. And we're not meant for that. We're meant to be in brotherhood. We're meant to be connected. We're meant to lift up and carry and support each other as we move towards our goals. And so that's what this community is about. So we're looking forward to having you hopefully come join us and get uplifted as you move towards your fatherhood goals.
It's a good wrap up. So just a little wrap up message. Being a good dad isn't about never losing your cool. It's about taking responsibility, repairing when needed, and learning what your anger is trying to tell you. So I have a challenge for all our family out there. What would change if you stop yelling? What would you change if you stopped seeing your anger as a failure and started seeing it as feedback? Good question. Good question. All right. As always, wherever you're watching this, are you subscribed to our show? If not, why not? Why not? So hit that subscribe button, whether it's on our YouTube channel, whether it's on our podcast. And also, too, we'd love to answer your questions about fatherhood during our shows. So email your questions to podcast@dadcentral.ca. So as always, I'd like to say thank you so much for doing this, for listening and taking the most valuable thing in your life, your time to spend with us. As always, don't just manage your time, manage your energy, and remember to give yourself grace. Be well.